December 1944, the Ardennes forest, Belgium. The Battle of the Bulge, Germany's desperate final offensive in the west. Obergefreiter Hans Müller, a German infantryman, crouched in the frozen forest, exhausted and starving. His unit had been advancing for days with minimal supplies. The German logistical situation was catastrophic. Rations hadn't arrived in over 48 hours. Müller's last meal had been ersatz coffee, made from roasted acorns, and a piece of black bread that was at least 30% sawdust. He was ordered to check an abandoned American foxhole his unit had just overrun. The Americans had retreated quickly, leaving equipment behind. Müller approached cautiously, rifle ready, expecting booby traps. The foxhole was empty of soldiers but full of supplies. Ammunition, medical supplies, extra clothing, and something Müller hadn't seen in over a year. Something he'd almost forgotten existed. A small brown bar wrapped in wax paper. Chocolate. Real chocolate. American chocolate. A Hershey's Field Ration D bar. Emergency ration. 4 ounces, 600 calories. Designed to sustain a soldier when no other food was available. Müller's hands shook as he unwrapped it. The smell hit him first. Cocoa. Real cocoa. Not the synthetic chocolate substitutes Germany had been producing. Not the coffee made from acorns or the tea made from herbs. Real chocolate, made from real ingredients. He broke off a piece. It was hard, remarkably hard, almost brick-like. He had to work to bite through it. The texture was chalky, dense, not smooth like he remembered chocolate being before the war. The sweetness was muted. It didn't taste particularly good, actually. There was something deliberately unpleasant about it. But to Müller, who hadn't eaten properly in days, who hadn't tasted real chocolate in over a year, who'd been surviving on deteriorating rations that barely qualified as food, it was the most delicious thing he'd ever experienced. He ate the entire bar, all 4 ounces. He knew he should save some for later. That's what emergency rations were for. Emergencies. But he couldn't stop. The chocolate, the calories, the taste of something that wasn't synthetic or adulterated or stretched with sawdust, it was overwhelming. As he finished the bar, Müller had a realization that shook him more than the artillery fire that had been pounding his position for days. Germany was losing the war, not because of tactics or strategy or bravery, because of this chocolate bar. Because the enemy nation, the nation Germany was fighting, could afford to give real chocolate to common soldiers. Not officers, not special units. Every soldier. As standard equipment, emergency rations made from real ingredients, produced in such quantities that soldiers carried them casually, sometimes left them behind when retreating because more were always available. Meanwhile, Germany couldn't feed its own troops. The chocolate bar Müller had just eaten, deliberately made by U.S. Army specifications to taste just a little better than a boiled potato, so soldiers wouldn't waste it by eating it casually, was better than anything he'd been issued in months. At that moment, Müller understood. This wasn't a war Germany could win. You can't defeat an enemy whose industrial capacity is so overwhelming that even their deliberately bad emergency food is a luxury you haven't experienced in over a year. This is the story of the Hershey's D-Ration chocolate bar. Not a weapon, not a vehicle or aircraft or ship. A chocolate bar. Deliberately designed to taste bad. Mass-produced in quantities that seemed impossible. And proof to enemy soldiers who captured it that they were fighting a nation with resources beyond anything they could match. The story begins in 1937, when the U.S. Army contacted the Hershey Chocolate Company with an unusual request. The Army needed an emergency ration, something compact, lightweight, shelf-stable, Calorie-dense? Something a soldier could carry easily and consume quickly when regular meals weren't available. The Army already had various rations, but they wanted something specifically optimized for emergencies. Combat situations where cooking was impossible, where you needed calories fast, where storage and transport were critical. Chocolate seemed like an obvious choice. Calorie-dense, contains sugar for quick energy, contains fat for sustained energy, doesn't require preparation, reasonably shelf-stable if properly formulated. Soldiers generally liked chocolate, so morale boost potential. But the Army had specific requirements, very specific, somewhat unusual requirements. First, the bar needed to be 4 ounces exactly. Not 3, not 5. 4 ounces. This size fit Army equipment specifications and provided a standardized calorie amount. Second, 600 calories per bar. This was non-negotiable. The bar had to provide enough energy to sustain a soldier for several hours if necessary. Third, it needed to withstand temperatures up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit without melting. Soldiers would be carrying these in tropical jungles, North African deserts, vehicles sitting in the sun. A melted chocolate bar is useless and creates a mess. Fourth, it needed to be durable. Soldiers would be throwing these in packs, sitting on them, dropping them. The bar couldn't crumble or break easily. And fifth, the most unusual requirement, it needed to taste just a little better than a boiled potato. The Army representative was very specific about this. The bar should not taste good. It should not be delicious. It should not be something soldiers wanted to eat for pleasure. Why? Because this was an emergency ration. Emphasis on emergency. If the chocolate was delicious, soldiers would eat it recreationally. They'd consume their emergency rations when they weren't in emergencies. Then, when a real emergency came, when they actually needed those calories desperately, the rations would be gone. The solution: make the chocolate deliberately unpalatable. Make it edible, nutritious, functional, but not enjoyable. Just barely good enough that soldiers wouldn't throw it away. Just good enough that in a genuine emergency, they'd be grateful for it. But not so good that they'd eat it casually. One Army officer reportedly told Hershey's, "We want it to taste just a little better than a boiled potato. Good enough to eat when you're desperate. Not good enough to eat when you're not." This was a bizarre design brief for a chocolate company. Hershey's entire business was making chocolate people wanted to eat because it tasted good. Now the Army was asking them to make chocolate that deliberately tasted bad. But not too bad. Just bad enough. The technical challenge was significant. How do you make chocolate that doesn't melt at 120 degrees? Chocolate naturally melts around 90 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Getting it to withstand 1 to 20 required fundamentally changing the formula. Hershey's food scientists went to work. They experimented with different formulations, different ratios of ingredients, different processing methods. The formula they developed was radically different from normal chocolate. Oat flour instead of just cocoa and sugar. This made the bar harder, more durable, more resistant to heat. Skim milk powder for protein. Sugar, but less than normal chocolate. Cocoa, but again, less than normal. Vitamins added for nutritional completeness. The result was dense, hard, chalky. It looked like chocolate, sort of. Brown bar, chocolate smell. But the texture and taste were distinctly off. It was chocolate-like rather than chocolate. Chocolate adjacent. Chocolate's distant cousin, who nobody particularly liked, but who showed up to family gatherings anyway. Soldiers who tested it had immediate reactions. It tastes like a brick. I could break a tooth on this thing. This isn't chocolate. This is a chocolate-flavored weapon. The consistency was compared to various things, none of them complimentary. One soldier said it had the texture of modeling clay and the taste of old library books. But it met the specifications. 4 ounces, 600 calories. Wouldn't melt at 120. Wouldn't crumble easily. And critically, it tasted just a little better than a boiled potato. Mission accomplished. The Army approved it. The Hershey D-Ration, officially Ration, Emergency D, went into production in 1941. The D stood for several things depending on who you asked. Some said it meant designed. Others said dextrose because of the sugar content. Most soldiers assumed it stood for dog because that's what they thought it tasted like. The official designation was simply D, the 4th ration type developed after A, B, and C rations. Production scaled up rapidly after Pearl Harbor. Hershey's Chocolate Company in Hershey, Pennsylvania, dedicated significant factory capacity to D rations. Other chocolate companies joined production, Blommer Chocolate Company and others. By 1945, production was enormous. The numbers are staggering. During World War II, American chocolate companies produced approximately 380 million D-Ration bars. 380 million. That's enough to give every American soldier multiple bars. Enough that they were standard issue. Enough that for D-Day alone, June 6, 1944, 24 million bars were produced and distributed to invasion forces. Think about that. 24 million chocolate bars for a single operation. One day. The logistical capacity to produce, package, distribute 24 million of anything is remarkable. That this was emergency rations, a backup food source, not even primary rations, shows the scale of American production. The bars were packaged simply. Wax paper wrapper. Brown label indicating it was U.S. Army Field Ration D. Instructions: to be eaten only in emergency. Some packages included warnings. This is emergency ration, not for routine consumption. The Army really didn't want soldiers eating these casually. Soldiers carried D rations in their packs as standard equipment. Alongside ammunition, medical supplies, water purification tablets, the D ration was just another piece of gear. Unremarkable. Ordinary. Always there. Until it wasn't ordinary. Until the emergency came. Until the soldier was cut off from supply lines, or pinned down under fire, or lost in jungle, or adrift at sea. Then the D-Ration transformed from that terrible chocolate bar I'm carrying to the food that might keep me alive. Veteran accounts are remarkably consistent about this. Soldiers almost universally describe the D-Ration as tasting terrible. Worst chocolate I ever had. Barely edible. Tasted like sweetened cardboard. The complaints were constant. But then comes the second part of almost every account. But I was grateful for it. It saved my life once. Never thought I'd be so happy to eat something that terrible. When you're starving, even the D-Ration tastes good. One veteran wrote, "The D-Ration was the worst food the Army gave us, and we complained about it constantly. But every soldier I knew who survived being cut off from supply, and I knew several, credited the D-Ration with keeping them alive long enough to be rescued or fight their way back. We hated it. We needed it." Both things were true. The psychological impact on enemy soldiers who captured American supplies was profound. This wasn't about the nutritional value or the calories. This was about what the D-Ration represented, what it said about American industrial capacity and resource availability. German rations deteriorated steadily throughout the war. Early war, German rations were adequate, not luxurious, but soldiers were fed reasonably well. As the war progressed, and Germany's situation worsened, rations declined in quality and quantity. By 1944, German soldiers were receiving rations that would have been rejected as inadequate in 1940. Ersatz coffee, not real coffee, but coffee substitute made from roasted acorns, chicory, grains, black bread that was extended with sawdust and potato flour to stretch grain supplies, margarine made from coal byproducts, synthetic fats, canned meat that was more preservatives than meat. Sugar was rare. Real chocolate was almost impossible to obtain unless you were an officer or had connections. German soldiers' letters home frequently complained about rations. The coffee tastes like dirt. The bread is more wood than wheat. I haven't seen real butter in months. They're feeding us food I wouldn't give to pigs. Then these soldiers would capture American positions, and they'd find the supplies American soldiers carried casually. Sea rations with real meat, coffee, real coffee, not acorn substitute, cigarettes, candy, and D-Ration chocolate bars. Even the D-Ration, deliberately made to taste bad, specifically formulated to be barely better than a boiled potato, was better than what German soldiers were receiving as regular rations. The chocolate that American soldiers complained about and made jokes about was a luxury German soldiers hadn't experienced in months or years. This created a psychological shock. If America's emergency rations, the food they gave soldiers only as a desperate backup, was better than Germany's regular rations, what did that say about each nation's situation? What did it say about industrial capacity, resource access, logistical capability? German military leadership tried to maintain morale by claiming American abundance was temporary, unsustainable, propaganda. But soldiers who'd tasted American chocolate knew differently. You can't fake chocolate. You can't propaganda your way to real cocoa. Either you have the resources to produce real food, or you don't. America clearly did. Germany clearly didn't. The same dynamic played out in the Pacific Theater. Japanese soldiers faced even worse ration situations than Germans. Japanese military doctrine emphasized fighting spirit over material comfort. Supplies were often low priority. Soldiers were expected to endure hunger as part of military service. By 1944, Japanese soldiers in bypassed Pacific islands were often starving. Supply ships couldn't reach them through American naval blockade. They ate whatever they could find. Local plants, insects, sometimes nothing. Starvation was common. Surrender was rare, but when Japanese soldiers did surrender, often it was because they were literally dying of starvation. When they encountered American supplies, the abundance was incomprehensible. Americans had so much food, they could afford to be wasteful. Food was left behind during retreats because carrying it wasn't worth the effort. More would always be available. One Japanese soldier who surrendered on Guam in 1944 was given a D-Ration bar. He later testified through interpreters that he couldn't believe America was giving real chocolate to common soldiers. In Japan, chocolate was a rare luxury only wealthy civilians could afford. The concept of military emergency rations made from chocolate was beyond his frame of reference. But the D-Ration wasn't just psychological warfare. It served its primary function, emergency food, remarkably well. Soldiers survived on D-Rations for days when cut off from supply. The 600 calories per bar wasn't enough for full daily needs. A soldier doing heavy work needs around 3,000 calories daily. But it was enough to sustain life, maintain some energy, prevent starvation. Soldiers lost in jungle, shot down over ocean, trapped behind enemy lines, separated from units. These soldiers survived on D-Rations until rescue or until they could rejoin friendly forces. Every bar of terrible-tasting chocolate represented another day of survival, another chance at rescue, another opportunity to make it home. There were creative uses, too. Soldiers discovered they could melt D-rations over small fires and mix them with other ingredients to make them more palatable. Add water, and you get a drinkable chocolate liquid. Mix with crackers from C-rations, and you get a chocolate-cracker combination that was slightly less terrible than either component alone. Some soldiers crumbled D-rations into their coffee to make a sort of mocha drink. The Army noticed soldiers were finding ways to make D-rations more edible and worried this would encourage non-emergency consumption. But ultimately, they allowed it. Soldiers enduring combat deserved whatever small comforts they could create. If making the D-ration slightly more palatable through creative mixing improved morale, that was fine. Post-war, the D-ration had mixed legacy. Veterans remembered it with combination of disgust and gratitude. Nobody wanted to eat it again. Nobody missed the taste. But many credited it with survival during desperate circumstances. Hershey's Chocolate Company received commendation from the Army for the D-ration program. They'd successfully manufactured hundreds of millions of bars, meeting difficult specifications. They'd contributed to the war effort through food production. The association with military service became part of Hershey's brand identity. But Hershey's was also somewhat embarrassed by the D-ration. It was chocolate that deliberately tasted bad. That wasn't exactly good advertising for a chocolate company. Post-war marketing emphasized Hershey's regular chocolate products, the ones designed to taste good, not the military rations designed to taste barely acceptable. The D-ration influenced post-war military ration development. The principle of emergency rations remained important. Subsequent military rations incorporated lessons from D-ration experience. Modern military rations still include chocolate products, though with better taste and different formulations. The current military HUA bar, an energy bar in modern MRES, is the D-ration's descendant, still designed for emergency energy, still shelf-stable and temperature-resistant, but much better tasting because modern doctrine no longer requires deliberately bad flavor. Turns out, soldiers can be trusted not to waste emergency rations even if they taste good. So modern rations prioritize both nutrition and palatability. But the D-ration's historical significance extends beyond ration evolution. It represents American industrial capacity applied to feeding soldiers. The ability to produce hundreds of millions of chocolate bars meeting specific requirements, distribute them globally, ensure every soldier had emergency food. This was logistics and manufacturing at scale that no other nation matched. Germany tried to develop emergency rations. They had chocolate products, but they couldn't produce them in anywhere near American quantities. German soldiers didn't carry standardized emergency rations because Germany's industrial capacity was needed for weapons, vehicles, ammunition. Food production was secondary. Soldiers ate what they could get, which was increasingly inadequate. Japan's situation was even worse. Japanese soldiers often carried minimal rations, expected to forage or endure hunger. The concept of ensuring every soldier had emergency food was a luxury Japan couldn't afford given resource constraints. This was the fundamental difference. America could afford to give every soldier deliberately bad chocolate as emergency backup food. That capacity to produce food so abundantly that even emergency rations were guaranteed and standardized demonstrated industrial superiority that translated across all aspects of war production. The same factories and supply chains that produced chocolate bars produced ammunition, uniforms, medical supplies, vehicles. The same logistical networks that delivered D-rations to every soldier delivered everything else soldiers needed. If America could put chocolate bars in every soldier's pack, they could put bullets in every rifle and fuel in every tank. Enemy soldiers who tasted the D-ration understood this intuitively. That terrible chocolate bar wasn't just food. It was evidence of an enemy whose resources were essentially unlimited compared to their own. Fighting such an enemy was futile. You can't win a war when the enemy's emergency rations are better than your regular meals. The D-Ration cost money to produce. The exact cost per bar is hard to determine from historical records, but probably less than 50 cents in 1940s dollars. Minimal cost, modest investment per soldier. But the psychological impact on enemy soldiers who captured them was significant. Every D-Ration bar found in captured American supplies was propaganda proving American abundance. This psychological warfare aspect wasn't intentional. The Army didn't design the D-Ration to intimidate enemies. It was designed to feed American soldiers in emergencies. But the unintended consequence, enemy soldiers recognizing American resource superiority through something as simple as chocolate, was valuable nonetheless. The story of Hans Müller, the German soldier in the Ardennes, is based on composite accounts from multiple German soldiers' testimonies. The specific name is changed, but the experience was common. German soldiers encountered American supplies, tasted American food, recognized the implications. Some German officers tried to maintain morale by claiming American supplies were isolated examples, that America was stretching resources thin to create impression of abundance. But soldiers who'd captured American positions multiple times knew better. Every position had supplies. Every dead or captured American soldier had rations. The abundance was real and consistent. By late 1944, German soldiers' morale was crumbling partly because of this recognition. They were fighting an enemy that could afford to be wasteful because abundance made waste meaningless. An enemy that gave chocolate to common soldiers. An enemy whose industrial capacity seemed limitless. The Battle of the Bulge, where our story opened, was Germany's last major offensive. It failed for many reasons, but one contributing factor was German logistical failure. Supplies didn't reach forward units adequately. Fuel ran out. Food was inadequate. Meanwhile, American forces, once the initial surprise wore off, demonstrated their usual logistical competence. Supplies flowed. Soldiers were fed. The D-rations that German soldiers like Müller found in captured positions were evidence of systematic supply superiority. The D-ration itself was never going to win the war. It was chocolate, emergency rations, a small piece of a much larger supply system. But it represented something important. American industrial capacity applied to soldier welfare, ensuring every soldier had food, even in emergencies, producing hundreds of millions of bars of deliberately bad chocolate because soldier survival mattered more than taste. That's the real story of the D-ration, not the taste. Everyone agrees it tasted terrible. Not the nutrition. It was adequate, but not optimal. The story is what it represented: industrial capacity, resource abundance, systematic organization, ensuring every soldier was supplied. The confidence to produce emergency rations in such quantities that waste was acceptable because more were always available. German soldiers tasted captured American chocolate and realized they were losing the war. Not because of the chocolate itself, because of what the chocolate proved about American capacity. When your enemy's emergency rations are luxuries you haven't experienced in months, you're not winning. You're fighting a war you've already lost, but haven't admitted yet. 380 million D-ration bars. Each one a small brown brick of barely edible chocolate. Each one evidence of American industrial might. Each one a reminder that resource abundance wins wars as surely as tactical brilliance. The D-ration tasted terrible. Everyone agreed on that. but it helped win the war. Not through combat effectiveness, through what it represented. American soldiers carried it. Enemy soldiers envied it. That tells you everything about why World War II ended the way it did. Just a little better than a boiled potato. That was the specification. That's what the U.S. Army asked Hershey's to create. Don't make good chocolate. Make bad chocolate. Make chocolate that soldiers will only eat in genuine emergencies because it tastes so unpleasant. 380 million bars of deliberately terrible chocolate. 4 ounces each, 600 calories each, enough to sustain a soldier for hours when nothing else was available. Designed to withstand 120-degree heat. Hard as a brick. Chalky texture. Taste compared to sweetened cardboard and chocolate-flavored modeling clay. American soldiers hated it. Complained about it constantly. Made jokes about using it as a weapon instead of food. Then they'd get cut off from supply lines, run out of other food, and survive on D-rations for days. And they'd be grateful for that terrible chocolate because it kept them alive. German soldiers captured American supplies during the Battle of the Bulge and other operations. They found D-Ration bars. They tasted them. Even though the chocolate was deliberately made to taste bad, it was better than German regular rations by 1944. Better than the ersatz coffee made from acorns. Better than the bread extended with sawdust. Better than the synthetic fats and declining meat portions. That realization, that America's deliberately bad emergency food was better than Germany's regular food, told German soldiers everything they needed to know about who was winning the war. You can't defeat an enemy whose industrial capacity is so overwhelming that even their worst rations are luxuries you haven't experienced in months. The D-ration wasn't a weapon, it was chocolate. Terrible chocolate. But it represented American industrial capacity applied to feeding soldiers. The ability to produce hundreds of millions of bars meeting specific requirements. The logistical network to distribute them globally. The confidence that waste was acceptable because more were always available. That's the story of the Hershey's D-ration. The chocolate bar that tasted terrible, saved lives, and proved to enemy soldiers that they were fighting a war they couldn't win through resource comparison alone. If this story surprised you, if you didn't realize that food and logistics and industrial capacity were just as important as tactics and weapons, then you need to subscribe. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. War Rewind covers the stories that textbooks skip. Not just battles and weapons, but the industrial might, the production capacity, the logistics that actually won wars, the chocolate bars, the cargo ships, the mass-produced vehicles, the overwhelming abundance that no enemy could match. Drop a like if the D-ration story shocked you. Did you know America deliberately made chocolate taste bad? Did you realize enemy soldiers recognized defeat through something as simple as emergency rations?